Hello everyone, this is part 10 of What If Naruto Was the Blue Uchiha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Jiraiya fell from the sky with an earth-shuddering thud. Not wanting to do any more damage by breaking his ankles, the sage followed through with his landing and rolled backwards. "I've never killed a Sannin before," an idle voice murmured, just as the Sannin righted himself and the din of his landing had settled. The wind changed direction and he stood up straight, proud and unafraid as the pale moon beamed down on where he had fallen down. It was a wide glade with a thin river cutting through it, turning northwards a short distance down, running in the general direction of hidden saltwater. The edge of his vision blurred and Jiraiya narrowed his eyes, shattering the impending illusion encroaching on his senses with the ease of a master shinobi. Blue was standing on the rushing river, as if he had always been there. The light from the moon provided enough illumination for the Toad Sannin to know, without a doubt, that the man on the stream was in fact the man Minato had reported to be dead. Naruto, Blue, Uchiha. The 6-foot-tall Uchiha was swathed in a midnight black cloak that had a collar high enough to hide his mouth, though showing the bandages wrapped over his eyes and his spiky black blonde hair as well as, just barely, a pair of bandaged feet clad in black shinobi sandals. Jiraiya crossed his arms, an image of power. The corners of Blue's lips turned up. "You're quieter than usual, Jiraiya," the blind man stated, tilting his head to the side a little and smiled invisibly, amusement dancing about him despite the deathly shadows ebbing out of his mere presence. "Shocking. How are you not dead?" the white-haired man said through clenched teeth. "Minato killed you. Does that really matter? I suppose not. Not until I get you back to Konoha and your mind-walker friend picks your brain for answers." And Inoki would, being a shinobi of the leaf, a husband, a father and a clan head, Naruto's Yamanaka friend had too much to lose if he defied orders. Jiraiya then scratched his chin, his brow furrowed in thought. "I wonder, all this could have been avoided if I had handed over Crystalline." Blue finished. He breathed out and shook his head. "Combat is already more technical and ordinary lives are in enough danger. We don't need Crystalline in anyone's hands." "But yours," the sage muttered spitefully. "Selfish brat. I never gave a shit what you thought, Jiraiya." He cocked his head to the other side, smiling serenely amid the palpable night on his half of the glade, creeping out from his cloak in smoky tendrils the moonlight struggled to cut through. "Your existence is overhyped, just like that student of yours. Come quietly and I'll just knock out a few teeth from that smart mouth of yours." Jiraiya hissed. He squeezed his chakra core into a tight ball, suppressing his presence while at the same time firing each of his main tenketsu in preparation for what was to come. "No," Blue said negatively, he almost sounded apologetic. Regretful even, yet hiding the simmer of enjoyment bubbling inside his dark being. A beady-eyed crow cawed loudly and landed on its master's left shoulder, leaping off half a second later. "You're dying here, Jiraiya. I was hoping you'd resist." The white-haired sage cracked his knuckles and a grin cracked up his face. "Let's see how long you can stay smug." He finally seemed to notice the changes that occurred behind and around Blue, the ineffective moonlight falling on the black-blonde Uchiha, making him out to be more silhouette than man, and the rancor of the murder of crows perched around the edges of the glade. Blue turned his head to the moon, like he was looking at it, and the moon shone down on him as the blackness of the underworld seeped back into the blind master of crows. All at once, the crows became silent. A chill ran through Jiraiya. Blue took off his black cloak with a flourish and the material dispersed into a murder of crows, which in turn disappeared into black mist. The blind sniper was wearing dark clothes, a black short-sleeved shirt that showed his pale arms, black shinobi pants and a pair of ninja sandals on feet that were tightly wrapped with white bandages. The only visible weapons he had on his person were a set of kunai and shuriken in a dark red holster on the sides of his thighs, and nothing else. Jiraiya noticed Blue didn't have his midrange launchers on his forearms or Crystalline on him. Admittedly, it would have been odd if the blind sniper wielded them, seeing as the Uchiha knew with fair certainty that the Sannin wouldn't afford the legendary marksman the space to utilize his famed weapons. The Master of Crows didn't have to see to know the internal conversation rolling through the sage's head. Naruto's wicked expression darkened, his hands clenched at his sides and he leaned back coolly. Don't go easy on me just 'cause I'm blind, okay? A blind Uchiha, huh? Jiraiya scoffed, rolling his shoulders and settling into a fighting stance. When he was done grinding the Uchiha's head into paste, he'd make sure Blue was properly healed. Now, he wasn't going to make the mistake of holding back. Jiraiya remarked, pleased with his mental agreement to take the Blue sniper seriously. This is going to be fun. Yes, Jiraiya, this is going to be fun. Jiraiya's hands flowed through a set of hand seals and he held Ram under his chin, inhaling deeply. Fire release. Fire dragon flame bullet. A magnificently massive dragon of golden red colors roared from the Sanin's lips, tunneling with malicious intent towards the blind Uchiha, standing with a calm lean on the rushing stream. Naruto hummed and his left hand whipped up to his chest, just as the flaming dragon neared him, with its deadly hot maw wide open and ready to consume him whole. His fingers flashed through 8 one-handed seals. Water release. Earthen walls of Atlantis. The chakra he had been seeping into the stream under his feet reacted to his command and rose up 20 feet up into the air, forming a semicircular wall of water that sparkled with black-red chakra, fortified with the heads of hydras at the top and bearing multiple red-tipped tridents facing outwards. The fire dragon slammed headfirst into the wall of solid water, doing so with a final bellow of rage before it collapsed into mist once it entered the steaming hot water, succumbing to its natural enemy despite the water itself being blistering hot. Steam billowed around the blind Uchiha, washing over his body and bathing the entire landscape in thick whiteness, pouring out from the roaring water wall he had called forth from the stream. One of his eyebrows flickered and he glanced over his shoulder. The toad sage appeared behind him in a mid-crouch, his left hand reared back and shining brightly with a vengeful Rasengan, spiraling in his palm as the spiky-haired man bared his teeth, perspiring from the heat but resolute to end the fight as soon as it had started. He drove his arm forward, holding a fully formed spiraling ball of death and thundering out his intentions. Rasengan. Ooh. Blue. Yugito called, turning around in a full circle and looking for where he had disappeared to. One moment she had been holding his hand, the next she was holding a piece of paper that read, "I'll be right back." She looked at the brief letter again and grunted, displeased. She rubbed her sore temple with her fingers and sighed. Damn it, Blue. Not again. He'll never like you, you know. Someone said airily, her voice genial and uncaring in spite of the heated way the Nibi Jinchuriki whirled around to face her. The Kumo Kanoiki narrowed her eyes at the speaker and the person, not intimidated, shrugged ever so slightly and casually looked away. Not the way you like him. The stranger had a mocha complexion with ebony hair made into shoulder-length dreadlocks, tied into a ponytail at the back of her head. She had sharp, snake-like golden yellow eyes and small, pouty lips painted with black makeup. She was dressed in a ceremonial silvery gray and yellow long-sleeved kimono that was designed with winter roses, with a dark sash around her waist and a pair of ballet slippers on her feet. The mocha-colored woman looked and acted like a princess, standing straight with her hands together close to her abdomen, smiling beauteously under the hateful look cast on her by the suddenly irate Kanoiki. How's that any of your fucking business? Mother's intuition. The woman with dreadlocks answered lightly, looking to her other side as a few children passed them, giggling and holding sparklers over their heads as they ran. Mother. Yugito wondered under her breath, squinting her eyes at the dark-skinned lady before her, then her eyes widened. Oh, Orochimaru. The disguised Sanin winked. Overcoming her shock, and pushing away any fear for the snake lady, Yugito briefly wondered how the woman was using a henge to hide her real face without using chakra. Orochimaru's smile widened, showing her poison-tipped fangs, and Yugito realized that the older woman wasn't using an illusion. Don't scream. The genius scientist said quietly, stalking closer and standing at level height with the other woman, seeing the mortification and horror blanch the blonde's face gray. The currently dark-skinned Sanin's face smoothed over and she spoke again in a voice no outsider would be able to pick up, making sure to maintain eye contact. And listen carefully, ni Yugito. I'll only say this once. Yugito's jaw clamped shut and part of her mind searched around for an escape route in case things between her and the S-rank missing ninja who just so happened to be her love interest's mother went south. When all of this is over, when you and my son are done burning down the Namikaze's estates, I want you to disappear. A broad grin grew on the dark-skinned Sanin's face and the corners of her golden yellow turned up with malicious glee. Or you will disappear. Yugito grit her teeth at the pointed killer intent being forced on her by the older Kanoiki, focusing her murderous rage on the Nibi holder alone and not alarming any of the other festival goers. The Kumo ninja's heart thudded in her chest and she hissed, her eyes briefly flaring with the heterochromatic yellow-green of the Nibi no Nekomata. Orochimaru couldn't be any less intimidated, and she displayed her condescension by lowering her eyelids halfway and smiling peacefully, displaying lethally sharp canine in the process. Do we have an understanding, ni Yugito? Hell, no, the bleach blonde replied, her voice thick with defiance. Fuck that. The dreadlock-wearing snake lady hummed with muted displeasure and she bobbed her head. I see. She tapped her chin, casually regarding the blonde, as if dissecting her body with her eyes alone, dividing it into neatly categorized chunks to be split apart and studied at the famous scientist's leisure. Yugito fought down the urge to shiver in horror. You're not a very smart girl, ni Yugito. I don't care if you don't approve of me. Naruto and I are going to happen. Orochimaru tittered and ghosted the back of her fingers on Yugito's cheek, cooing. Such naivety. She tutted when the tips of her fingers barely felt the increase in the Jinchuriki's pulse and the harsh jerk the blonde did to get Orochimaru's light fingers off her face. How about this? She proposed, lacing her fingers close to her middle. You have 10 hours to finish your business with my son, leave and never contact him again, or, she lifted a delicate finger and a new smile bloomed on her face, one that made the Nibi, sealed in Yugito's gut, rear up and hiss. Or, I put you in a hole so deep and so dark not even someone as unstoppably omnipotent as my son will be able to piece together what's left of your soul. Yugito lifted up her chin and the corners of her lips twitched as she snarled, her eyes fully changed and phantom-like blue chakra warbled thinly over her body, killer intent directed back at the Sannin. The snake lady hissed out an amused chuckle and gave Yugito a familiar pat on her cheek in spite of the tailed beast chakra. There we go. Seems you finally understand what I've been trying to say. Fuck you, bitch. The Kumo Kunoiki spat hatefully, somehow keeping the beast chakra from setting fire to the general area around her but focusing her ire at the legendary Sannin. Yugito jabbed a finger at the dark-skinned Sannin's chest. Watch what you say to me or I'll turn you into fucking nothing, bitch. Is that so? The Sannin had the audacity to look impressed, casually gliding around Yugito in her strictly maintained kimono and with not a dreadlock out of place. Enjoy the festival while you still can. I recommend you try the yakitori, it is phenomenal. The blonde's eyes followed the dark-skinned Sannin as she seamlessly merged with the crowd, disappearing a split second later. Yugito clenched her fists and forcefully pulled in her beast chakra, controlling her rage with a few relaxing breaths, having to close her eyes to regain her center before she reopened them again and brushed a strand of her hair over her ear, annoyed and mentally whispering for her tailed beast to settle down. All the demon cat's aggressive prowling in her mindscape was giving her a headache. Yugito took out a small handheld makeup kit and snapped it open, checking her reflection through the small mirror. Hag. Ooh. The Master of Crows was an anomaly unto himself. All of death and damnation revolved around him, and even before his demise he was a fairly powerful shinobi proficient in his ninja way and the ninja arts of the continent, made famous among his circle of friends and a throng of unwavering comrades dotted all over the continent. His years undergoing personal rehabilitation in Uchiha had not gone to waste. He had pushed hard and stubbornly on the boundaries of his existence, testing out what he could and couldn't do with his so far unnamed deityhood. There wasn't really much Blue couldn't do, now that he commanded the messengers of death and was the physical manifestation of hell, but even so there was a small, irksome limitation to his abilities. He couldn't reach into people's chests and tear out their souls. The person had to either wish for death or be at the brink of death. Blue couldn't pluck out the former case's soul if he was nearby and if he wanted to, if not the blind Uchiha could just as well ignore the person. He could also set fire to them and they would undoubtedly sing for the Shinigami to take them away from their misery. In the case of the latter, the person on the brink of death, it was as anyone imagined. Someone dying from wounds, an illness, or mere seconds before a natural disaster struck, and the person would certainly die. Presently, Blue was content with beating Jiraiya within an inch of his life and making the Sannin wish he was dead. That would be so much more satisfying. The air was still. The Rasengan spiraling vengefully in Jiraiya's palm surged towards the small of the blind Uchiha's back. The older ninja's teeth were grit with concentration, wanting the shining ball of death to meet its mark without dissipating. Then, just for a split second, the world flashed black and white. The Toad Sage's eyes bugged out. The tip of a blade scratched the base of his skull, pressing ever so slowly. In that moment the world stood still, so much so that it spilled out a few beads of blood, not a worrying amount but more than sufficient for it to sting. Someone was behind him. The moonlit night regained its color after that nanosecond break in time, and the Sannin decided to divert his attacking arm, shifting it further to the left and tumbling into a neat roll as he dispersed his Rasengan. He righted himself and clenched his teeth as he saw Naruto's water clone standing behind its summoner on that rapid river, twirling a single kunai in its finger and sending a wave from over the real Naruto's shoulder. "You didn't see that coming?" The real Blue asked, tilting his head in the general direction of the moon and feeling the heat from the steam reduce to a small tingle on his face. The Uchiha's lips twitched up into a small smile as he sensed the very onset of fear set in Jiraiya's mind, only for it to be pushed aside. He was now suspecting that the damnable steam was also chock full of the Blue Uchiha's chakra. The Sannin supposed that Blue had forced his chakra into the tumbling rapid rushing under his feet, but he didn't know that despite how hard and fast the water was rushing, the Uchiha was still able to make his chakra seamlessly bend the water into a clone, which crumpled back to its base for a little while later. The problem with that statement was that if chakra entered water that was flowing that fast, it was essentially lost. Only someone with the prodigious command over water like Tobirama Senju, or the only other human that had formerly walked their planet that had enough chakra to equate him to the seven-tailed beetle, Hashirama Senju. Jiraiya's heart clamored in his chest as his eyes dipped down shortly, seeing the exact spot Blue was standing over. A whirlpool as large as the river itself swirled peacefully beneath his feet, and the loud rapids of the river either bent around it or merged with it. The Shinigami had once said that half of Blue's soul bore the same weight as that of a tailed beast. In life, the Blue Uchiha didn't have much chakra to brag about, but now, after his death, his mind and body were open to a floodgate of chakra from his very being. The abyss was a construct of primordial chakra, and Blue was the abyss. These universal secrets the white-haired Sannin was not privy of would serve to damn him. The black-blonde Uchiha tittered and barely cocked his head to the other side, beckoning to the older man to come. "Try again." Jiraiya's eyebrow twitched, and that's exactly what he did. Flashing to his blind opponent in an explosion of channeled chakra and a thud of air, he reappeared before the blind Uchiha in a blur, and his right fist surged towards Blue's chin, and the sniper swept under it, sliding away from the spinning elbow, racing for his cheek, ducking an overhead kick and stepping aside from a summarily raised roundhouse kick. The calmly turning vortex of water Blue was standing on, and which Jiraiya unwisely battled over as well, never once flickered with the loss of control. Blue used the back of his hand to divert a palm strike to his face, used the palm of his other hand to smack down a knee to his abdomen, shifted his body away from an enraged punch to his trunk, turned in a full circle away from a front kick for his pelvis. The younger man rumbled thoughtfully, roughly understanding what Jiraiya's fighting style was all about. "I see." As Jiraiya swept past him after the failed low blow and he pivoted on his heel to deliver a backhand blow to the sightless Uchiha's face, there was another millisecond pulse of black and white. Abiding by instinct, the Sannin hadn't once looked at Blue's upper face, seeing as the sniper had the Uchiha bloodline flowing through his veins, but despite being in a flurry of strikes, Jiraiya didn't need to look at Naruto's face to mercilessly emotionless mask that slid over his visage. The toad sage hastily hopped back as his danger senses flared, aptly getting out of the circling whirlpool. He clapped his hands and Blue crossed his forearm. Spiked Jizzo. The Sannin's hair grew exponentially till they reached the grass he stood on, spiking madly and hardening, covering most of his back and sides, though not his meshed fingers. Blue flicked his wrists and a fistful of shuriken burst into between his fingers in a fan of silvery steel, lowering his center of gravity and moving his feet as if he made to dash to the Sannin. There was a tense standoff, until the sage blasted the needles from his hair to his opponent, and Naruto reciprocated by snapping his wrists, sending his ninja stars, throwing his last shuriken half a second later. They intercepted the hard hair needles in the middle noisily. Clang 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 cla cla clang clang. The milky white eyes under Naruto's bandages flicked from left to right, keeping track of each blocked attack with the attention of one who had perfect functionality of their eyes. His sensory perception painted a very accurate picture of what was happening, and whatever didn't have chakra imbued on or through it was recreated in his mind with a 99% accuracy through guesswork. Broken needles and shards of metal fell on the ground, perfectly diverted by the flurry of steel. Then the ninja wire connected to the last metal star glinted under the light of the pale moon, tied to his right pinky finger while his left hand flashed to his chest in a half-ram hand seal. Shadow Shuriken technique. That one star transformed into 50 and Jiraiya's eyes widened with horror, pulling his hardened, spiked-up hair more around him and bracing for impact as the vengefully whirring shuriken honed to his form. His sharp eyes caught the small wiggle of the Uchiha's left pinky finger. Shadow shuriken clinked against shadow shuriken, more and more, curving their trajectory downwards. They thunked into the earth and the explosive seal etched into each of the stars lit up, illuminating the shrouded sage in ethereally black-red chakra. There were no flames, only a controlled shockwave. And it remodeled the glade. Boom. Blue used his forearm to cover his face as the heated blast washed over him, hiding his elated grin. His clothes flapped violently in the wind and he fastened his feet to the whirlpool of water, chuckling pleasantly that his last action finally brought out something Jiraiya purposely didn't want to use. Don't joke with me, brat. The toad sage cursed, holding the ram seal in front of his face and his eyes snapped open. Sage mode. Ma and Pa stood on each of his shoulders, dignified and defiant. The two toads focused the brunt of their attention on using nature chakra to keep the shockwave away from their summoner. You fight like a movie star, Jiraiya. Blue remarked, cracking his fist and smirking. Loud, arrogant attacks with a deplorable defense, that can't be why you're a Sannin. You don't want to see me when I'm mad. Warts grew on parts of his face and his nose became fatter. His eyes became amphibious and the nature chakra coming from him evolved into a bonfire. Trust me. Blue chuckled lightly, humorlessly. Neither do you. He beckoned once more, as the earth's shaking stopped, sensing the panic coming from saltwater. Show me your anger. The increase in speed and skill was noticeable. This time, Blue obliged to return strikes. A punch was met with Jiraiya's forearms and he quickly sidestepped a knee to his torso, snapping his elbow to Jiraiya's face and sweeping around with the momentum once the blow was dodged, swing his feet into a hook kick. The Sannin caught his foot and Blue hopped up, kicking his other foot on the white-haired man's chest, pushing off in the process and back-flipping into the air. A massive fireball slammed into the Uchiha's airborne body. Fire release. Toad oil flame bullet. The toad sage's fingers never stopped moving, and so did the two toads on his shoulders, exhaling fire and oil on their unfortunate victim, carrying him into the sky and relentlessly burning him even as Blue crash-landed back onto the earth. Jiraiya's muscles tensed when, instead of falling onto the ground and crying out in pain from being burnt alive, the blind Uchiha, standing in the middle of the blaze red-orange flames, dusted off his shoulder. He smirked widely and his bandaged eyes swirled in their blind whiteness. Blue proceeded forward, starting with a slow, steady jog, pushing hard against the torrent of burning oil, before his pace increased to a hard sprint, tearing through the ground and cutting a path through the fire with his head lowered and his arms flying behind him. Just in the nick of time, Jiraiya cut off his fire jutsu and crossed his arms before his face, blocking a jumping knee, shoving the blind Uchiha away for space. His right forearm smacked away a fist to his side but that left him wide open for a gut-splitting knee to his stomach. Blue dragged his knee from the older shinobi's trunk, bent his knees underneath a swing for his head and planted 3 straight blows into the sage's throbbing gut, swept to the side from a Spartan kick honing for his chin and buried a fist into the Sannin's side, splintering 2 ribs. Blood blasted out of the sage's mouth and Ma cried out. Jiraiya. The heat ebbing from Blue's form cast delirious images in the white-haired man's head, and he just managed to hop over a sweep for his legs and spinning in the air from a vicious palm strike. A column of black-red flames bellowed from the Uchiha's palm. Vroom. As his feet touched down and he flared his sage chakra to ward off the toxic hellfire from his body, his forearms creaked, fractured from guarding the jumping knee and the cloth of his stomach fell apart in ashy flakes, exposing red fist marks on his gut. An internal battle was occurring between his sage chakra and an unknown chakra poisoning the muscles of his arms, specifically the general area around the hairline fractures of his forearms. When human chakra invaded another human being, it was commonly classified as a genjutsu. Chakra poisoning from human to human without the aid of chemicals was unheard of, only seen and experienced from tailed beasts to humans. Jiraiya spat out a glob of blood and smashed his fists together, expelling as much of the eroding chakra from his arms. The fire that had been born from Blue's palm blazed angrily behind him, oddly remaining in the confines of the glade, as if compelled to do so by an unseen force. Jiraiya didn't perceive any barrier seal and the behavior of the black-red flames indicated that even though they were brushing up against trees and foliage, they had no intention of setting him ablaze. His contemplation was forcefully ground to a halt when the Master of Crows attacked, entering a quick-paced sequence of strikes and counters, and it was only by pure instinct alone that kept the Sanin's consciousness with him amid the festering heat pulsating from the manifestation of the underworld. The black blonde man came with a foot to Jiraiya's face, switching in midair in a perfect feint and nailing his right knee in the sage's chin, snapping his right foot into Jiraiya's left shoulder, almost toppling Pa, and finally returned to the ground with a double axe blow. The Sannin could only use his right arm to block the overhead blow, as his other arm was sprained from the last kick and the muscles were in the process of hastily being mended. The ground trembled as the axe blow rocked through Jiraiya's body like lightning through a lightning rod, aggressively spider-webbing at his feet and depressing somewhat. Naruto gathered his hands back to his chin and bent his knees, driving the knuckles of his left hand into his opponent's gut, rose up a bit and arrived with a right hook aimed at the Sannin's neck, which was blocked by a forearm supported by a hand. For a moment, Sage Mode cleared his mind, despite the hellish heat, and he guarded the left jab for his neck by diverting it with a right palm strike to Blue's wrist, following along with the speed and strength of the guard and cracking his elbow across Blue's face, came back around with a haymaker to the blind man's temple, but only getting a few strands of hair as Blue half-stepped back, not too fazed by nearly having his head torn off by the former elbow. The powerful muscles of his legs hardened and his backward half-step reversed, coming forward with a brazen headbutt, given this much freedom because Jiraiya made the mistake of sacrificing brute strength and speed in his haymaker for accuracy. Smack. Jiraiya saw white. Ma and Pa yelled, pushing dangerous amounts of nature chakra to heal the head trauma. Unfortunately, not quick enough. Blue dragged his left arm back and the muscles of his upper body rippled maliciously under his clothes, circulating primordial chakra over his body and focusing a large portion to his left hand. His fingers shot forward and the tips ripped into the center of Jiraiya's chest, rearing back half an inch, curling inwards and shooting back as a fist a microsecond later, smashing brutally in the same spot his four fingers had dug into, eliciting a chilling crunch as the man's chest partially caved in, and finally, the last attack came in the form of a delayed blast of chakra that surged up from Naruto's core, through his arm and exploding at the point of contact on Jiraiya's chest. The air in the sage's lungs left him as fire and heat swept through his lungs, flying backwards and skipping on the whirlpool of water on the rapids, not unlike a stone, unable to be stopped at the current speed he was hurtling in. Blue's fingers blurred through four hand seals. Water release. Stillwater rampart. A wall of water shot out of the whirlpool and Jiraiya's back slammed into it. Before his feet could even touch the dangerous water, he once again knew only pain as a Spartan kick found itself in his gut, shattering the wall of solid, near impenetrable water. The kick was heard and felt all the way in salt water. Beads of water from the shattered water wall and bloody sweat from their summoner peppered the tiny forms of Ma and Pa, doggedly helping their summoner maintain his sage mode. Clarity found Jiraiya's mind once more, smashed into it in the form of that earth-splitting front kick, and he rolled onto his back, firing chakra to his feet and grinding to a stop on the grassy ground on the other side of the river. Fire didn't seem to work, so he tried the next best and arguably most powerful branch of ninjutsu, allowing instinct to carry his fingers through the long set of seals and doing so in a short amount of time. Lightning release. Master bolt of the lightning god. A beam of blinding white lightning erupted from the little space before his clasped fingers. Blue's hands had begun moving as soon as Jiraiya's. Earth release. Earth-colored lightning conductor. A pillar of yellow bronze earth cracked out of the ground and the beam of lightning clashed onto it, rocketing straight into the ground as the name of the jutsu implied, spreading and dispersing the nature chakra back into the nature of the now disturbed and altered glade. A yellow flash, different from the white light, blinked to Blue's right. Got you. A ball of blue chakra spiraled madly in the Sanin's right palm, supported at the wrist by his left hand. Rasengan. Jiraiya wasn't a master of the Rasengan, nor was he anywhere near adept at using the Harasshan. Setting up both took a considerable amount of time. He didn't have the prodigious skill of his student to be able to activate both skills at the drop of a hat, and, seeing as he had only used the Harasshan and Rasengan twice in this whole fight, he didn't think he would ever find the chance to tell Minato how proud he was for becoming the man he was today. He didn't need a fortune teller to predict his doom for him. He knew he was going to die tonight. At this brat's hands, no less. That didn't mean he was going to go down like a punk. The bellow that escaped his mouth was that of a man that knew his end was near, and that he would sacrifice his soul if it meant he would bring down his murderer with him. AAAAAARRRGHHHH. The Rasengan suddenly fizzled into harmless nothing and the Toad Sage's palm blandly slapped against Blue's purposefully crossed forearms. Chakra poisoning. A wide smirk slithered up Blue's face, peeking out from behind his crossed forearms. What fighting spirit left in his body evaporated and Jiraiya's eyes lowered halfway, bone-tired and close to blacking out from smoke inhalation. His body moved involuntarily. Naruto's low kick was blocked by Jiraiya's shin, but the Uchiha snapped his leg upwards, striking the side of the man's head and dropping his leg. The Sannin made to use his shoulder against his raised shin, catching a back fist for his chin with the back of his own fist, shaking off the cobwebs once more to roll under another fire-expelling palm to his torso. This wasn't the fighting style Jiraiya had heard Blue utilized, one that emphasized defense and backtracking so that there was ample space between him and his opponent, then using his long-range prowess to maneuver his weapons, his launchers, kunai, shuriken, senbon or otherwise accordingly. Now, not even his mid-range launchers were anywhere to be found, and even though Blue had used shuriken at some point during their fight, it was to deflect his hair needles as they flew at him, using one ninja star to block a few midair at a time, and he did so without his Sharingan. He had heard that the Blue Uchiha was a censor, so maybe. Then there was the fighting style he was seeing now. Descending Chaos Whirlpool Fist. It was the highest form of the infamous and near-forgotten Uzumaki fighting style, Falling Whirlpool Fist, the style that Kushina Uzumaki had mastered and was so far the only surviving master on the continent. The style was forward and aggressive, but at the same time it was patience in the sense that the user waited for an attack, used that split-second opening to rain down hell on his opponent and then maintain a steadily increasing amount of pressure until the opponent's body gave out. The style was alterable depending on the user. Kushina had altered hers to suit her personality, fiery and impatient, though she ensured not to use the elevated fighting style on any undeserving opponent. Blue adapted his stance to his personality, a deceptively strong base, wary, guarded, but powerful strikes, a serene temper despite the flames that roared at his beckoning, but also a chilling desire to cause as much pain before his opponent expired. Somewhere in his smoke-addled mind, Jiraiya was glad the man took him seriously. Descending Chaos Whirlpool was an advanced fighting style than Falling Whirlpool because, while the latter was indeed strong, it didn't require as much chakra and chakra control to sustain it. For an Uzumaki, it was a reason why no one else knew or had mastered the Uzumaki fighting style. The chakra requirements were staggering. The former, Descending Chaos Whirlpool, stressed that users be as steady as the earth, fast as lightning, liquid as water, blazing like the sun and, in all that, calm like the wind blowing through a meadow. Blue was a reputable Uchiha, and niggling thought informed him that the Uzumaki style wasn't the only fighting style he knew. In some morbid part of his mind, he was glad he had the honor of dying against a user of the lost taijutsu style. The heat was getting to him. Questions ran through his head, in his last few minutes. How could Blue poison his chakra? Even in Sage mode, it was something that could only be caused by exposure to tailed beast chakra, and that was for an average Junin. Where did Naruto learn a lost Uzumaki fighting style? How and why was he impervious to fire? How was he even alive? Fire doesn't just burn, Jiraiya. Blue said, grinning and opening his arms, indicating the wall of flames that surround the glade and the small eyes that dotted the flames, raptly spectating on the execution of one of the elemental nation's greatest ninja. Piles of smoke swirled up into the air, and seeing as it was the moon serving to illuminate the general surroundings, only Saltwater saw the mysteriously burning area deep in the forest. More than a few of their ninjas left to investigate. The more you breathe, the harder it becomes. Jiraiya coughed into the back of his hand, hunched over and stubbornly keeping his eyes on the blind Uchiha. You could have killed me quicker, brat, burned me to a crisp. Why you stalling? I really could have, but you see, if I burn you into oblivion, then what would be left of you for your boy, Minato? He scratched his chin and chuckled darkly. I have to be considerate. It's just who I am. The Blue Uchiha might not have been able to drag Jiraiya's soul straight to hell, but he could have ignited that portion of the forest with hellfire. I'll give you props though, you're taking this a lot better than Kiribi. Because at this point in Blue and Kiribi's fight in Zuki, the holder of the Eight Tails was too delirious from the heat and charred to bits from the fire that he became nearly unresponsive to reply the blows raining down on him. No doubt he'll be stronger now. He shrugged. Cross that bridge, you know. Jiraiya saw fire as Blue buried a fist square into his face. The impact of the blow took his off his feet and the two toads on his shoulders flew off, bearing scorch marks from an attack that focused primarily on Jiraiya's face. The loss of the two toads cancelled his Sage mode. Blue grabbed the dazed Sannin by the front of his shirt and yanked him right back into a headbutt. Crack. Jiraiya's knees gave out and Blue, releasing his opponent's shirt, rammed his knee into the older man's chin. The Toad Sage's spine arced with the blow and he unintentionally rolled with the hard momentum, falling onto his face. His bottom front teeth fell out onto the grass, scattered in the saliva and blood pouring out of his mouth and pooling on the ground. Oh ouch. He groaned like a dying animal, pushing off the ground and hacking painfully as blood ran from his mouth, down his chin and staining his shirt. He struggled to breathe and his body trembled, seeing three of the blue Uchiha casually watching him suffer through his bleary eyes. Ugh, what? The hinge joint of his jaw loosened as he grunted, one side completely dislocated and the other digging deeper than it should. Blood expelled from his throat as another wave of blood ran into him. Cack. It's very easy to not use smoke to clog your throat. Blue idly said, stalking closer and holding Jiraiya upright by his hair, patting his cheek to keep his eyes open even though he was no longer able to breathe. Fire isn't the only thing I can do. He cast a short look at the frozen vortex of water sitting on the rapidly rushing river. Your fighting style is good, but I'd rather not copy it. A single crow sitting in the inferno of the wall of flames had a 3-tomo Sharingan spinning in its sockets. His head snapped up to Ma and Pa as they got to their feet, settling into a fighting stance. They too could hardly breathe. The murder of crows under Blue's command screeched and cawed violently, flapping overhead and bearing threatening over the glade. Tell Minato he can find his teacher here. He held up a finger of his free hand, his other hand laced through the hair of the semi-conscious Sannin, swaying side to side from severe smoke inhalation, carbonizing his throat down to his lungs. I'll be gone in a minute, I've got stuff to do. Using the last ounce of strength in his body, Jiraiya turned his head to the side, his eyes wide with alarm and his broken jaw creaked open. Run. Ma screamed as Jiraiya's head ignited on fire, and Pa pulled her back, reverse summoning himself to the Toad summoning realm. The Sannin fell back in his kneeling position and sprawled on his back, wailing torturously, inhumanely, as the black-red flames curling and licking the flesh of his face did so agonizingly slow, taking its sweet time to incinerate the Sannin's skull. A-A-A-A-A-A-R-R-R-G-H-H-H-H-H-H-H-H-H. The cells of his face turned to ash and the flames tunneled down his throat, setting his heart ablaze and turning his other internal organs into thin soup. Blue squatted down next to Jiraiya's head and his sensory ability traced the demise of the book author in great detail, and he studied it in grim silence, emotionless and reflective. Still haven't gotten the hang of this. The demonic power vibrating through his body, the ethereal chakra pulsing in his reserves, the otherworldly sensory perception splashing in his skull, giving him a clear understanding of the seen and unseen universe and jutsus that couldn't possibly be comprehended by normal human minds almost drove him to summon them into the material plane. He had deliberately held back from utilizing any monstrous, inhuman strength as a test on his control and restraint. He wasn't used to all of this. Not yet. He tapped his chin reflectively. This might be a problem in the future. He didn't want his retribution to be as easy as walking into Konoha and setting fire to the village. And he could do that. It was tempting. But he had people he cared for in the village, Itachi, Yugao, Shisui, Azumi, Kushina, Inoki and his clan. There were also the people that didn't think he was a crazed, bloodthirsty maniac, a small few but even he, as tunnel vision-ed for revenge as he was still able to see and pick him out from the crowd, and he didn't want to harm people that thought the best of him. It was a conundrum. He mentally dimmed the flames and the tongues of hellfire ran into his back, retreating back to the underworld. He jumped a little in surprise when his attention went back to Jiraiya. Ah, he's dead. His flames had cleanly eaten the skin and muscles of his head, seeping into his skull and evaporating the brain, popping the eyes from the heat in the process and melting his tongue in what now used to be a mouth. Training. He echoed in his mind, resolute to control his godlike abilities. More training. Jiraiya's soul was already burning in hell, quite literally, and Blue felt a tickle of a smile on the corner of his lips as he heard the dead Sannin's tortured screams. The flames over Jiraiya's skull would burn for a few more days, as Naruto didn't move to withdraw them into himself. The blind Uchiha rose up smoothly and his black cloak gathered over his body. He didn't know until his last day on Azushio that he could resurrect long since dead Uchiha with their eyes still being usable, though he couldn't transplant them into his own simply because they weren't Mangekyo, and even when he managed to find one or two, they wouldn't be able to contain his inherent power. Right now, he didn't need an eternal Mangekyo Sharingan because, truthfully, he wielded an arsenal of abilities that adding that final evolution would become overkill. A rough guess, and his guesses usually weren't wrong, was that he needed the evolved eyes of someone directly related to him by blood in order to attain his own final ocular evolution. Mikoto. A slow smile grew on his face. She fit the needed requirements perfectly. Then his smile fell and his face became neutral. Even as he personally didn't see the need for acquiring M's, but something was telling him that he would need his M's in the close future, when all was said and done with Minato and his doubtful friends in Konoha. The Master of Crows turned his face to the pale moon beaming down on him and the desolate glade, sensing the serene glow of primordial chakra beating gently within the celestial body. The eyes underneath the bandages narrowed. 8:29 p.m. Some minutes later. Ichikuroku Ramen. Konoha. Minato rubbed his bandaged neck, where Blue had imprinted his burning hand on his flesh, and a similar hand mark on his chest, carefully hidden by his usual clothes, throbbed correspondingly. He cleared his throat and lifted a finger as he took a seat on a tall stool, nodding his head to the empty seat to his right for the person he was meeting to take a seat. Yugao eyed the man cautiously and sat down, perching her elbows on the counter of the ramen stand, bobbing her head when Tuki sent a glance at her. Lord Hokage, she murmured, her eyes facing front and her posture was rigid. Her back was straight and her eyes were hard. She didn't feel like changing, coming to meet the Hokage as soon as he summoned her for that informal meeting in a simple white t-shirt and black shorts with shinobi bluish sandals. There were no visible weapons on her person, but Minato didn't doubt that her katana and her standard weapons were somewhere on her person, as well as packs and packs of emergency packets, containing some spare clothes, a small tent, flint, a flashlight, flares, energy bars, simple food that could be cooked over a campfire, dry wood that didn't expel much smoke and much more. Yugao was an Anbu, a Kunoichi of repute and Naruto's childhood best friend. She was prepared for every and all eventualities, come what may. She was a simple woman, yes, but that was a shallow assumption. Minato knew better. Yugao had been in and out of relationships for the past few years since Blue had disappeared, and any falling out was not as a result of the woman being asexual but that her exes were threatened by her independence, wanting her to withdraw somewhat and depend on more on matters she could very well handle by herself, like money, clothes, food and shelter. Even though sex wasn't important to her, being asexual didn't mean she couldn't have sex. The woman was so used to proving herself to the Blue Uchiha, hoping to gradually repay him for all his kindness and consideration from when they were kids, that it affected her casual relationships. It was almost like watching Kushina and himself, except Kushina arrived from Azushio already well off. Yugao wasn't a defenseless kitten. The man scoffed and rubbed his neck, clearing his throat. Despite having enough funds to tend to her needs, the needs of Blue's nephew and Itachi's friends, if they came to her for help, that is, Yugao was building a legacy of excellence and mastery of the ninja arts, diverging from her roots as a farm girl. No matter how hard he tried and no matter how many years passed, the mature woman sitting by him still looked like the little kid that often dressed like a boy and acted as such. He could only see Yugao as Blue's closest friend. A friendship so profound and lasting that they might as well be sibling. The Blue Uchiha loved Yugao 100-fold times more than he did his own blood-related sister, and in turn, the purple-haired swordswoman returned his love in more than equal measure. Their personalities, her and Blue's, were starkly different, but he could only see the man he had killed. Tuki placed a bowl of shrimp ramen before the cage and a bowl of beef ramen, populated with vegetables and largish chunks of cow meat bobbing in the thick broth, for Yugao. The woman snapped her chopsticks and proceeded to eat. Jiraiya's dead. The woman paused as she cycled noodles into her mouth, hovering close to the bowl to not get the broth on her clothes. He noticed the shock that passed through her eyes as she kept her gaze down at her food. Minato emptily stared at his bowl of ramen, the disposable chopsticks lying by it. The Yondaime Hokage slowly placed his hands flat on the counter. The woman sat up and her lips straightened grimly, turning to him. It was the unofficially universal sign of non-aggression for shinobi. Enemy nations did this non-verbal action during peace talks, not wanting the debate to erupt into violence, hands flat on a table meant that they didn't have any weapons in them and they didn't intend to reach for any weapon on their person. It didn't often work, as tempers usually flared or one or all people involved only wanted the other's guard to reduce, giving him an opening to attack. Yugao slowly copied the Hokage's action, placing her hands on the counter and keeping her eyes front. She had seen torment and agony in his countenance, coupled with mourning and a sadness that reached deep into his very soul. "I'm sorry to hear that," the woman replied, searching her mind for a compliment for the late sage. He was a strong shinobi. She didn't quite respect him either, not as a person but as a shinobi. Not even Anko respected him, and she was a pervert. Her stomach grumbled and she made to reach for her chopsticks to proceed with her dinner, as she had been summoned before she could make some late-night rice at her apartment for herself and Itachi. Annoyance seeped from Minato's posture at her apparent lack of emotion over Jiraiya's passing, and out of respect as her superior she pushed her bowl away with a displeased frown. How did he die? Naruto killed him. This seemed to get her attention, more so than the news of the hermit's fate. My toads told me. You want me to investigate. Retrieve Lord Jiraiya's body. Her questions might have centered mostly on confirming the news or bringing the dead sage back to Konoha, but Minato knew that that would be a less than secondary priority. Her first being to use that lead to find her friend. What do you want me to do, Lord Hokage? His eyes narrowed and he glared at her from the corner of his eyes. If I didn't know any better, I'd think you were happy to hear he's alive. Yes, sir. His flattened hands curled into fists and the woman slowly pulled hers back, keeping on the edge of the counter and the other on her lap, ready to reach to the seal on her lower back and unseal her blade. His cerulean eyes became stormy with festering rage at her caution, from the moment she sat down to now. Minato then smirked and sniffed, lightly brushing his nose with the back of his pointer finger. He was the Yellow Flash. Fastest human being on the planet. If he wanted to kill her, she wouldn't know of her death until her decapitated head was looking up at her headless body from the ground. His question was direct and to the point. Has he contacted you, Yugao? No, she answered immediately. Her wits were about her but her guard was raised. Blue hasn't contacted me. He was silent for a moment, regarding her once more with a side-eyed glance, leaning on his elbows and lacing his fingers under his nose. Are you sure? Yes, sir. She nodded curtly, not relaxing. I wonder, why is that? It was her turn to narrow her eyes and the fingers on her lap dug into her thigh, using that as an outlet to facially hide her irritation at the Hokage's next question. Wasn't Naruto your best friend? His brow furrowed with faux concern. It was the look he had when he confided in his friends about Blue's mental stability those years ago, the one that shifted his friend's opinion of the sniper and briefly warped her perception of her best friend. He smiled with concern and looked at her. I thought, no, I hoped that on the off chance he was alive, he'd reach out to you. Let you know where he was and ask about your health. He shrugged with a heavy sigh. He is your best friend, right? He has his reasons. And whatever they are, I respect them. I'm okay with knowing that he's okay. By any chance, do you have a way to contact him? No, I don't. The man that claimed to have killed the infamous Uchiha sniper scratched his cheek in thought. That's too bad, that's too bad. He's still a dangerous criminal, so apprehending him is our priority. His head lowered and he audibly contemplated. But I don't want to cause a panic by announcing he's alive after I've assured the village of his death. Yugao pursed her lips. It was a matter of pride for the Hokage. He had said that Blue was dead, and now Blue wasn't. The minority of the village that mourned the loss of the Blue Uchiha would feel emboldened by the news. The Uchiha clan, without the support of their clan head, would become more volatile and hostile to the Hokage and those that supported him, not excluding their own clan head, for the simple matter of doubting the might of the renegade Uchiha. They would not readily obey orders and, in an extreme prediction, they would leave the village in order to seek Blue out. The other part of the small section of their society that weren't convinced of Blue's criminality or his demise might also feel more bolstered to spur the authority of the Hokage, much like how Blue was when he was in the village. If that small minority broke away or, at the very least, decided that abiding by the laws of their village and their Hokage wasn't worth the effort anymore, it could mean the total destruction of their society. He saw these predictions in Yugao. Though she saw him as a threat, what respect she had left oozed out of her body. Minato didn't know that it wasn't only because he had once claimed to have killed her best friend. No, it was because she could now spot the falseness of Minato's selflessness. I want you to go and bring Jiraiya's body back, he deserves a hero's funeral. Hi, Lord Hokage. She nodded slowly, unintentionally hesitant to render him the respect connected with his position as Konoha's cage. She hopped off the tall stool and bowed slightly. I'll gather my team. No, he shook his head with a small smile. You'll be going with Yamato and Kakashi. He shrugged freely. Her head jerked to the left and Kakashi stood at the entrance of the ramen stand. He sent a genial wave to his Anbu teammate and placed his hands on the back of his head. We're friends, right, Yugao? Minato suddenly asked, snapping his chopsticks and swirling them in his bowl of cold shrimp ramen. Yugao's head slowly returned to the Hokage and her instincts roared for her to run, to get as far away from the Yondaime and his student as possible. She perched her right hand on her hip, subtly preparing to unseal her trusty weapon at the drop of a hat, while her face was clear of emotion, flicking her eyes from Minato to Kakashi until she settled on her Hokage, nodding her head once. You'll tell me if Naruto contacts you, right, Yugao? Her wary hesitation brought a quiet smirk to Minato's face and he hid it as he slurped his noodles. Yes, sir. Okay. He smiled brightly, enough for it to look like a halo hung over his head. He cut the noodles entering his mouth and swallowed, licking his lips in content and lifting 4 fingers for Tuki to bring him 4 more bowls. I believe you. He brought the bowl close to his lips and chugged down the broth, smacking his lips once again and chuckling at the now visible apprehension of the prodigious swordswoman. Don't let me down, Yugao. Bring Jiraiya back intact and if you encounter Naruto, engage with the intent to kill. Okay. Yes, sir. His side profile told her that he was sad that he had putting her in such a position. She didn't make the mistake of believing his deceitful distress. Dismissed. She bowed and silently left with Kakashi, nodding her greeting to Yamato as she saw him waiting outside. The trio wore their Anbu masks and left the village. Finishing up his bowl of ramen, Minato hummed with satisfaction and smiled widely to Tuki Ichikuku as he laid down 4 more bowls from a tray before him. You seem happy, Lord Minato. The chef wondered aloud, setting down the last bowl. The Hokage laughed. Tell me, Tuki, what do you think of Naruto? Tuki was right about their age and had retired as a chunin after the war to open a restaurant. He was still developing his cooking skills and saving his money to expand his ramen stand to a ramen empire at a steady pace. Well, Minato hummed, digging in for his second bowl. Blue gave me a loan to start up my business. Tuki answered, placing the single empty bowl onto the tray and idly cleaning the counter with a rag. He also connected me to Yugao's father to locally source my cooking ingredients. Everything Tuki made, he either formed himself or he sourced from Yugao's father's farm, leaving nothing to be store-bought or artificially flavored. Yugao's father was a large-scale commercial farmer and the man got along with his only daughter's close friend, seeing the Uchiha as a good influence for his little girl and thereby not restraining his child or her friend from seeing each other or hanging out on his farm. Even though he had wanted Yugao to be a boy, even as he had mostly raised her to be as boyish as possible, and even as Virtue had her be the last-born of 9 older brothers, giving her tough skin right from the womb, the man didn't want any troublesome male nearing his baby girl. He didn't seem all that pleased to hear, from both Yugao and Blue, that they weren't interested in dating the other, but he was patiently waiting for the day they changed their minds. Until Blue disappeared. The man was more than happy to supply Tuki with crop and meat at Naruto's reassurance. Wheat, corn, rice, dairy products, soybeans, meat and whatever else Tuki needed. When I retired, I didn't have a penny to my name. No bank would give me a loan. Tuki turned to the side as his 6-year-old daughter passed behind him, carrying a tray of ramen to a group of junin, while his wife was at the back preparing more food. Blue found out and he loaned me more money than I knew what to do with. Lord Awazuki, Yugao's father, wouldn't have given me a second glance if Blue hadn't vouched for me. Awazuki had top-tier patrons for his products and wealthy restaurant chains vying to purchase from him. To have the influential farmer take time out of his day to speak to him was a privilege most restaurant owners couldn't even dream of. Cooking is my first passion, Lord Minato. Tuki said, screwing his lips to the side and tousling Ayami's hair as she rushed past him. I wouldn't be doing what I love without his help. Minato's left eyebrow twitched invisibly, and he graced the man with a kind smile. Well, it's a good thing he's dead, you don't have to repay the loan. Tuki shook his head. I'll give the money to his nephew, Itachi. His large shoulders lifted and dropped stiffly. Or Yugao, if Itachi doesn't have a bank account by that time. I always repay my debts. He froze as he looked up at the Hokage, taking a step back in alarm. Lord Minato. He reached into his apron and took out a stainless steel spatula, holding out to the blond man. Your eyes. The yellow flash glanced at his reflection in the spatula and his heart trembled. His eyes were milky white. He jolted out of the tall seat, his hands on his face and his eyes bugging out of their sockets. His vision was replaced by that of a house on fire, among a long row of burning houses. This wasn't Konoha. Minato knew every length and breadth of his village, and this wasn't Konoha. An ominous chuckle echoed in his head and he whirled around, or he futilely tried to, searching for the person but only seeing several more houses, alight with blackish-red fire. It was a strange fire, one that bellowed as if it bore life in each flaming tongue that lapped and licked at the brick houses, eroding and irreversibly scorching that part of the world. All the world was black and white, and yet the fire burned, the only thing of color in existence. His eyes were drawn to his hands and the first thing that was cause for alarm was that they weren't his hands. They were pale, lifelessly porcelain, and his fingernails were painted black. A pair of red gloves was draped over their right wrist and firmly held in those hands was a map of Iwagakure. The far eastern corner of the hidden village was charred black. Minato didn't need to be told that it was his real estate assets that were ablaze. The laughter ringing in his head increased as the Yondaim's pulse quickened. Little by little, bit by bit, I will end you, Minato. Minato was torn out of the vision and he found himself slumped against the counter of the ramen stand, being shaken awake by Tuki and surrounded by a few dozen people, worriedly murmuring about the health of their leader. The demonic laughter of the soul fragment sealed in his gut didn't allow Minato a moment of rest. Ooh. He made sure not to use any chakra or lighter fluid to set Minato's estate on fire, and he conveyed this to Yugito as well, seeing as that would leave a trace of their presence. Blue pulled his gloves back onto his hands and flexed his fingers. His arms went to his side, hidden under his black cloak, and the bright glow of the burning houses washed over his form. The sound of a gas line exploding was music to his ears. Yugito sidled up to him and leaned her head onto his shoulder. Blue knew many of Minato's kind, though only the Namikas had the resources and power to back himself up, and with this knowledge, the genius Uchiha knew that Minato fed off of the love and attention of his friends, siphoned power from the fear of his enemies and basked in the adoration of his fans. First, he would take away Minato's money, then he would disperse Minato's friends, and then the blind sniper would destroy Minato's reputation by the Namikaze's own hand. Only after Minato had nothing, absolutely nothing, would Blue grant him the mercy of a tortured death. Where are we going now, Blue? She asked under her breath, drawing heat not from the fire but from the inferno inside her crush. Land of the Sea. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.